Scott, it's awesome to have you here with me today. Thanks for coming. I know it's a Friday before a holiday, but it's awesome to have you here.
No, listen, thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Other than, listen, I don't know when spring starts up here. I left 78 degrees and sunny yesterday in Charlotte, and it's cold and gray up here in New Jersey
It
still.
could be 78 today, just random. It's flip-flopping this week, I think, between 27 and 72.
Yeah. There's no green leaves on the trees yet up here.
No. I feel it's gonna be a while. And actually, I used to do that when I was in Houston. Right, I would tell people what the weather was back here, and didn't make me the most popular person. And now it's kind of come back to bite me, because if I ever graze on that when I'm going through my thing, it's like it's 80 in Houston and quite nice, and here it's like still snowy. Actually, I could take you out. There's a pile of snow where they cleaned off the top of the garage there. That's still there.
Hasn't melted. That's amazing.
Not melted, which is good.
Wow. But by the way, your building is phenomenal. When I got here, I told you last time I was here, I think it was 2007 or 8 in the old building, and so
it was. What a difference! My joke is, like, there were 36 active leaks in the roof when I got here, and so I assume at least half of them were around in 2008. But this should almost be on the Amwins pilgrimage site, as a young Steve DiCarlo started his career in this building. And rumor has it, or he told me, that there's a picture of him and his mom and dad out in front of this building,
when
shortly
got his first job.
Yeah, his first
Yeah,
job.
listen, I don't think there'd be an Amwins without Crum Forster.
That's pretty cool. It's pretty the history and how all these things connect is pretty wild. So tell us, I ask everybody this first.
Yeah.
How did you get into insurance?
Again, like most people, a little bit dumb luck. I was an accounting major at Wake Forest, and started working at PwC, and Royal Insurance had moved its U.S. headquarters from New York down to Charlotte randomly in the this is the late 80s. And so that was the big insurance client of the Charlotte office, and randomly got stuck on it as my first engagement. And then once you kind of get in insurance, it's such a niche little accounting perspective, you kind of get stuck, and then which turned out phenomenal. And then from there, got involved with Travelers and AIG and all the other big PwC insurance clients, because you understood insurance accounting.
You never got Fairfax?
No, never, never Fairfax.
I actually, so in that was 92.
Yep.
I was at Arthur Andersen in 92.
Were you? Okay.
And so being an actuary, right, it's a little different. But I was one of the very few actuaries they had. But I remember the accounting guys who were in the insurance side.
Yeah.
They weren't that happy to be on the insurance side, right? They almost were like, we'd rather be on, and it was Chicago, right? So they would rather be on waste management or, some of the bigger industrial things. But was that the case?
I guess PwC had a pretty good insurance practice. I think the Charlotte office, some of my colleagues that I started with kind of looked at me like I was crazy, in that, instead of not being on the banks or a cool manufacturing business, Nucor Steel or something like that. But, nationally, it was a great practice. It was one of their,
I think they were always one of the biggest. I think they had the most actuaries at some point of all the accounting firms. Arthur Andersen had little tiny clients, a lot of self-insureds, and like I said, I think I was literally the only actuary in that office for a while, and so they didn't really know what to do with me, and it was kind of like this insurance thing. I'm trying to get out of it, and so you're there. Then you decide to get into the...
Well, then, so Royal, and let's go back a little further to CNF. So you guys own the London agency, right? And so Steve DiCarlo, after he spent a couple of years up here, internal audit, moved down to Atlanta and was the CFO of the London agency.
Oh.
And subsequently, Steve Smith, who was, I guess, the CEO of the London agency, ended up leaving. He didn't get a bigger job at Crum, or actually, I think maybe they wanted him to have a bigger job, and he didn't want to move to New Jersey. He wanted to do it from Atlanta.
I don't understand that at all.
Yeah, so it didn't work out. But regardless, he convinced Royal to start a specialty insurance business, so RSUI. And so Steve Smith, Jim Dixon, who was at London Agency, and Steve DiCarlo ultimately started RSUI, they owned 49%, Royal owned 51%. And so fast forward to, they'd been running it really, I think in probably 94, 95, they started it. So I think it was 97 or so, Royal looked up and said, this thing is growing pretty quick. The value of this MGA using our paper is increasing. I think we need to buy it. And so I got involved with PwC, helping do the diligence on that transaction to buy out the 49%. That's how Steve and I met each other. And
that's pretty cool.
So, yeah, kind of.
And so RSUI buys the whole thing.
Yeah, Royal buys the whole thing, RSUI.
RSUI buys it. So then Steve and you or how do you get over to that side?
So he stayed there another 4 or so years, still being the CFO of RSUI. And then they convinced him to move to Charlotte and kind of take a broader role over the, business, the commercial insurance unit and the specialty insurance unit. And so he moved to Charlotte and we kind of got back in touch, and he convinced me to come take kind of the finance role for him in 1999.
That's pretty cool. So that's 1999. Now, because I was trying to think about that. Had you always been in North Carolina?
I grew up in Atlanta, but after college, I ended up moving to Charlotte,
and then because North Carolina was kind of a hotbed of like weird little E&S insurance activity, right? Because I was in Burlington for a while, right?
Okay, Burlington is a little.
And
you're
so,
right.
And so you had Burlington
Seaboard Underwriters.
You had Seaboard,
which we now own. That you guys used to own, yes.
Like Don Sangren, who was Seaboard.
Yep.
He was working with me. I went to he passed away, and he was such a cool guy. But he was always talking about Seaboard. He was always trying to get me to give him like trucking, whatever. But he was Seaboard, which we owned, because he was still getting a pension from Crum.
Really?
Then you had like Jay Johnson, you had Dub Love, you had, I think Jay had moved from like Axiom to.
That's right.
Or he had moved from Aon to Axiom, and they would do that pig thing with the night golf or whatever. And Willis Re had a thing down there. Tapco, right? It was this whole little E&S kind of thing. But you guys were.
Yeah, Charlotte was kind of Royal was it for insurance in Charlotte.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was trying to think if there was some connection there. So it's 99 and 99. So then how does Amwins come about?
So 99 is the same time that Royal or RSA at the time agreed to buy Orion Capital, if you remember. Orion. Yes.
Hugging the anchor.
Yes. And so before I had left PwC, I got a call, it was July 2nd or something like that. It said, hey, listen, clear your weekend plans. You're going to miss July 4th. Royal's buying this company up in Connecticut. We need to get up there and start diligence right away. 24 hours later, July 3rd, you got a call back. No need to do diligence. They've decided they're just going to buy it.
Oh boy!
And
that was 1999 for you. It was like,
it ended up taking down, a great, U.S. insurance company.
That's interesting. I did not remember Orion until you said that word. Like, that's pretty wild.
Yeah. So shortly after that, I ended up leaving anyway, PwC to join Royal. And so we worked heavily on the integration. And the more we worked on the integration, the more we found the skeletons in the closet. And, it really was a mess. And talk about under-reserving. It brought down the healthy side of Royal's business with the deficient balance sheet. And so after a couple of years of doing that, it wasn't all that fun. I think, Steve was also pretty frustrated with the big bureaucracy of, how things worked in Charlotte versus Atlanta at RSUI. And so he got a call from a headhunter, a failedinsurance.com business in New York, Americana Financial. The private equity guys were firing the management team that they gave the initial seed capital to because it was a disaster. And so Steve ended up taking that job as CEO. He wanted it to, be CEO instead of CFO, and thought he could turn it around. And I joined him 4 or 5 months later, and took a business that was losing $1 million a month back then, got it to break even in September of 2001, and we've made money every month since that time.
That's wild. Well, and so I get that, right? I can't picture Steve putting up with a lot of bureaucracy, right?
No, it was not meant for him. He's likes to move fast.
And then, right, I've been a CFO a couple times, and there's something about that is right. It has those quarterly. It has that rhythm.
Yep.
Which if you like that, it's great. If you're kind of like, and so I could picture that exactly. And so it came out of the .com bust. That's really wild.
Yep.
Who was the private equity back then?
It was a group up in Connecticut, Pegasus Capital.
And so you're there 4 months in. Who else is there?
So I hired a woman that worked with me at PwC. She came over as our controller. And essentially, we fired all the home office people in New York. There was like 45 people spending all this money on a business that didn't generate barely $20 million in revenue.
What was their .com concept?
They were going to build a platform that basically would disintermediate, not only wholesale, MGA, but all retailers, and insurers were going to come, and they spent half of the capital building this, fake technology.
But I love that because I mean, in that period, I cannot tell you how many people were giving me the old blah blah on, right, it was the .com blah blah, but it was also the disintermediation.
Yes.
And wholesale was first in line to go. And so if you would bet against wholesale in 2000 and whatever, in 2001, probably the worst time to bet on that ever in the history of mankind, right? And so, but everybody had that, like, the internet, these wholesalers are gone. I don't know what we're still doing in this business. And I'm like, I don't know about that. And so the fact that it's kind of ironic then that you guys took that over and that was the kernel.
Yep.
That's funny. And so so it's you, a controller, you fire everybody, Steve's there. Then what?
Then we sold off 3 or 4 of the businesses that they had acquired. They were buying retail business as well as wholesale. And Steve, from the very beginning at RSUI, was wholesale only distribution. So he loved that, especially part of the industry. But if you looked across the industry, it was made up of a lot of still mom and pop lifestyle businesses. And so his vision from day one is to build a national, platform, a well-run business. And so as we divested certain of the retailers, including Risk Strategies, who now is part of Brown & Brown, ultimately, Mike had sold his business to the original management team, and we sold it back to him for, probably 50 cents on the dollar. And so he ended up turning it into a great business and sold it again.
But yeah, but I think it's interesting, right? Because that mom and pop aspect, that was it, right? I mean, that was the whole game back then. And so I remember doing the tours of different, I like that, the lifestyle business. I gotta use that. But there were a lot of like just the second or third generation. You had a lot of still first generation, but a lot of cowboys, a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And so the fact that everybody's talking disintermediation, did that help with the roll up or the valuations, or was it the...
Things were certainly a lot cheaper to buy back then. And yeah, we kind of lucked into, after cleaning up and at least getting the existing businesses, which really were an MGA operation, a couple specialty benefit operations, to, making money, shrinking the corporate overhead spend. We got together with a West Coast based wholesaler that had started expanding, bought an operation in New York City. It was, hard to manage. And ultimately we kind of put the two businesses together. They were 20 million in revenue. We were 20 million in revenue. And, they took a lot of equity in the transaction because we didn't have a lot of cash to pay them. Our private equity guys were not giving any more equity, and we could only borrow a little bit. And but ultimately, that's what really jump started us in June of 2002.
What was that company?
It's called MTS.
MTS.
Matukas, Telford, and Sullivan. And Ernie Telford was one of the founders there, and he was our chairman for a number of years after that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yep, that's great. And his son is one of our largest property brokers. His son-in-law is one of our largest casualty brokers now. And then his grandson actually started working for us last year out in Orange County. So it's a great story.
So you're 40 million then, and this is now like 02-ish.
Yeah, 02.
And just for perspective, like how big are you guys going to be this year?
3.4 billion.
Well, 3.4. What's your
49 billion of premium.
49. I'll call that 50. 50 billion of premium. I mean, that's unbelievable, right?
It is hard to believe. We never would have guessed.
Yeah, that's like an insane number, right? 50 billion. I mean, how many $50 billion companies are out there? Not many.
Not many.
So are you one of the biggest in North Carolina?
We definitely are. We're I think we're the third or fourth largest privately held company in North Carolina.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so back to 02. So you're in 02. Like then and then you had benefits all the way back then?
We did. Yeah, we didn't really know what to do with it. But it was acquired and it was wholesale, and so we kept it.
That's funny because and
then learned more about it as the years went on.
We'll get to benefits in a minute, but so pure wholesale plus a little bit of benefits, 40 million. And then what was the rise of Amwins, right?
I think the next kind of catalyst was Elliott Spitzer. So Elliott comes along 2004, 2005, starts investigating the big three retailers, right? And each of them owned a captive wholesaler at the time. Marsh owned Crum, Aon owned Sweat, and Willis owned Stuart Smith. And, I'd say that while he never specifically targeted the kind of retail wholesale, what was going on in those firms at the time, each of them wanted to divest. And so we bought Willis's business, Stuart Smith, in 2005. And so that really took us gave us a national platform and, purely wholesale brokerage, transactional brokerage. And that was a real fundamental change.
Where did the other two go?
So Sweat ended up spinning out with a private equity firm and as a standalone business that ultimately didn't work and got sold to CRC.
Okay.
And then Crump similarly spun out and didn't work, ended up part of Bisis, and that ultimately ended up part of CRC as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so that, how big, so that's 0405, how big is that now?
So then now we're probably 150 million of revenue.
And like how many people then?
Still probably less than 1,000.
So still on the front end.
Yeah.
But 04, right? The companies that were doing E&S back then.
Yeah, there's still the landscape of, specialty carriers wasn't that broad, right?
Yeah. So it would have been, the people doing actual straight up E&S isn't right.
Westchester obviously was still there.
Yeah.
Axis had started, right around that 2001, post 9/11. So they were there. RSUI was still there. Scottsdale,
you had Scottsdale,
part of Nationwide.
But I was thinking, like, you had Burlington, you had Gainesco, you had Markel, you had Berkeley, you had Argo. But it was still pretty niche.
It was very, very niche.
And then what's the next pivot?
Then probably the next was 2010. So Colmont Brokers, I don't know if you remember them. At the time, they were the fourth largest wholesaler behind, us, Sweat, CRC. And they had a great business. They ended up doing an MBO from Heath Lambert in London, bought the U.S. business, ended up hiring one of the ex-Heath guys in London who convinced them to expand internationally, even though they're U.S. they were great in the U.S. And they got over-levered and got into trouble. And that was what enabled us to buy them. So again, consolidating number 4 into number 1 gave us even more scale and breadth in 2010.
And I assume that was like a reasonably priced.
Yeah, we got it turned out to be very financially a very good deal.
Well, that's pretty cool. And so 2010.
And interesting enough, the 23 employee shareholders who we, fought for and kind of took some equity away from their private equity partner to give to them to supplement because they'd gotten, impacted so negatively. All 23 of those shareholders are still with us today.
Because that is one of your track records, right? I got to experience one of the pitches with you and Steve with one of our partners. Didn't quite work out, but I remember the pitch being quite compelling. And so you tend to keep.
We've never had a principal that we've acquired their business leave us to go compete. So we've had a number now retire and unfortunately pass away, but nobody's ever quit once they've partnered with us and gone back in the business.
I'll come back to that. That's interesting because that's got to be pretty rare.
I think it is. And hopefully it, validates that, what we tell you about our company and our culture and how we treat people is true once you get over on the other side. I mean, what we found really though is most of those entrepreneurs love selling.
Yeah.
Selling insurance. And they were running a business and building the admin that you have to run the business, and that wasn't their passion. So you can take that away from them and let them focus on their passion of insurance.
So has the E&S market really started to run in 2010?
It is growing faster than the broader P&C market, but not, at the pace that happens later in the
story.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get Colmont. And by then, how many other companies have you kind of rolled up?
Probably at that time, we'd probably done 20 different acquisitions. Since 2002 to today, we've done 65 acquisitions. So 65. Average 2 to 3 a year over that 24-year period.
That's a pretty good clip.
Yeah, but nothing like the retail brokers.
Was nothing like retail. I mean, those are like those. Well,
they do 1 or 2 a week. Some of them at their peak.
I almost feel. Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine.
I know
how that works, right? Because those have all different feels.
They
right?
do,
like where you're like, oh, we'll just buy you and leave you alone.
You
now have a new name and a new boss, and he's 25 years old, and have fun with that, and more like rolling up as you were talking about, like dentist offices or something, right? And so you're just like, or just turn the meat grinder, and so 65 seems like a reasonable
pace.
Kind of pace. Okay, so 2000. What's the next?
Probably the next would be a couple years later, 2012, when we bought Lloyd's broker. So THB was a small at the time. Less than 100 million of revenue. We knew Frank Murphy, really well, the CEO that was running it. We'd done. A fair amount of business with them. They were highly focused on property. And, I think at the time we were giving them $40 million of premium. But what we saw was, listen, Lloyd's in London is a key part of the E&S specialty landscape. And ultimately, we wanted to have boots on the ground there. I think our wholesale competitors at the time thought we were crazy. And said, hey, listen, we just want all the Lloyd's brokers to compete for our business. And we thought it could be ultimately a better client experience being coordinated. And, I think hopefully today, some of them are thinking differently about it.
Right.
And it's grown to, now a $300+ million business. And the beauty of it now, the platform, while we strategically do use it, only 40% of their business comes from Amwins brokers in the U.S. 60% is still third-party retail and wholesale around the world.
That's not bad.
So you actually are able to attract really talented London brokers. You're not just a captive catcher waiting for us to send stuff. You're out there and can, go out and hustle and, be very successful.
That makes sense. And I think that's kind of it for E&S internationally, right? I would say like it's the U.S. and London.
Yeah, in Bermuda we have an operation, but our view is, we're not trying to plant flags around the world, and no single insurance market's big enough to really have wholesale needs, and so we can service that via London and Bermuda.
The U.S. is pretty big, right? So a lot of times people say, well, we'd like to go do this or that in one of these other countries. And then they realize like the total like volume of countries is not that big. I'm like, why don't you go do a tour of Iowa and get me some more there?
Exactly.
Double that and we'll be good, right? And I think that it's not as much fun maybe, but it's probably more productive in the long haul. So you're now in London. You're in so now it's like 2012-ish.
Yep.
And you're starting to enter the golden era of E&S.
We're getting closer, definitely. So I think the next big thing, that first private equity group I talked about, they had invested $25 million, which, was worth zero when we got there. We ultimately found a new private equity partner to buy them out. They turned that 25, they got $100 million back. So 4x their initial investment. So, the second private equity group in 2005 that came in, Parthenon out in San Francisco, they were great partners. And, they ultimately stayed for 7 years. And Brian probably would have, if he could have, fund structure wise, still, be an investor today. But so ultimately we had to sell and pick a new partner in 2012, which we picked New Mountain Capital in New York. They were good, but, all of a sudden, we're doing really well. They're like, hey, 3 years in, maybe we should, and we said, this is crazy, every 3-5 years having to find new partners. And so in 2015 was really fundamental from a capital structure. We found, 2 longer term private equity partners, one being PSP, the Canadian Pension Plan, and the second Dragoneer Investment Group out in California. And Marc started Dragoneer. He actually was early in his career at Parthenon, who was our second private equity fund. He went to school with Ben Sloop, our current president, so they knew each other.
He's a Harvard guy.
Yeah, he's a Harvard guy, yes. So we had that kind of continuity where we really knew him, and his fund he structured from day one as an evergreen fund, so he didn't have that 10-year time pressure to return capital. So all of a sudden in 2015, we swap out and we have 2 long-term institutional partners, we call them now. And that's fundamentally changed the business. It's allowed us to, focus long-term and think about, we always say, we think in 5-year chunks, not 90-day increments. And we've had the luxury to do that because, once you're 3 or 4 years in with a regular private equity firm, all of a sudden time horizons diverge. You're thinking 5 years from now, they're thinking 1 year. And
that's interesting because Fairfax obviously has that kind of long-term focus, and it's a different world when you're thinking, okay, how do I build this company for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, as opposed to I got a number that I got to make. Right. And so, not to jump around on our timeline, but today there's so many people who have models that just seem like time bombs on that front, right? Because the market's doing what it's doing right now. So by the first time in 8 years that things are actually shrinking in a bad way.
Yeah.
And most of those models don't behave well with shrinkage, right? And then a lot of them didn't quite, maybe they were on the bubble between the 3 and the 5 years, or the 5 and the 7, possibly. And so those valuations can't be skyrocketing, and they might not make that. And so, that's got to be opportunity for you guys.
Yeah, I think it definitely is. Although a lot of the consolidation in our space, large consolidation, has kind of already happened. So if you look at what's available now, it is good sized MGAs, 10 million of EBITDA versus who typically are still 100% employee owned or management owned. Not a lot of private equity in the space. But if you look across that, retail landscape where there's, I think, 36, 37 private equity backed retailers out there in some stage, I think your point is exactly right. They're all kind of looking at now what? A lot of them.
And again, I think it's that I'm always fascinated because, right, I know obviously a lot of people, a lot of people, and you just, some of the business plans are so short term. And I'm like, I don't know that that's like a responsible, right? You're hiring people, we hire people for kind of their career path and try to keep them excited about being here for a long time. You obviously do too. So you're getting the stable capital, and that's 2015.
Yep.
And that's with the Canadian Pension Fund and Dragoneer, and you still have them.
Yes, they're still.
And so it worked. And so you're mostly employee owned.
We're 42% employee owned.
That's pretty good though, right?
It's pretty good.
Like a good
1,870 employees out of the 8,000.
Oh, that's a good.
It's a good almost 20%. And with, the accredited investor thing, I mean, as a private company, there's some limits on who can own it. And so.
Oh, so they have to be qualified.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So of the eligible people, I assume it's close to 100%.
Exactly.
And then that comes as like bonus, or that comes as they can buy in like independently, or
they
both?
Can buy in. So we have twice a year you can buy in or get liquidity. So that what we tried to say is, as a private company, the one thing you don't have that the public companies do is daily liquidity. But
Prem's funny on that because he'll talk about it's probably apocryphal, but it was somebody that told them they had to sell some Fairfax shares to buy or to build a pool. He goes, "That's one expensive pool," which is probably true given the timeline that he was doing it, right? But
so Prem actually is a proponent of employee equity ownership.
Oh, absolutely.
As opposed to Buffett and Berkshire, they were just there's no ability running. Nope.
Really? No. Prem's big on that. And so
makes sense, but
it makes a total amount of sense. And again, it's been funny. Actually, if you look at the Fairfax shares, our history with that is they were in kind of a trading range that was pretty tight for like a decade.
Yeah.
People would grumble that we're paying them in Fairfax shares, but then it went up by a factor of 8 over the last couple of years, right? So if you had gotten them, you were getting them this whole time, and then they went by 8. It's like putting the cookies on the top shelf.
That's pretty good.
And so a lot of people are like really happy that it worked out that way. But during that period, but Prem's always like, we have an employee stock purchase plan where we match, and then we give bonuses in stock and cash, and so people can participate, and people can just go straight up and buy them if they feel like it. But yeah, he's a big fan of that, and so he would be happy if everybody. We don't have the same
restrictions, right?
Yeah,
as a public company.
So we have a pretty good percent. I don't know what our exact percentage is, but it's high. It's like I want to say like a beefy like 50% or something like that people own something. But okay, so your capital's straight. You're coming into the ENS golden era.
Yeah.
Now what happens?
It's I'd say we really made a pivot. So we really doubled down on building training programs in both our brokerage businesses and underwriting businesses right around that kind of 17, 18 time period. And started small, 10 or 12 young kids a year, and now we're up to classes of upwards of 60 a year that are in that program. And now that they've come out of that program, they spun out, they have their own books of business. I mean, they are real drivers of organic growth. And
that's huge. And that's where we do a lot with that. Like, we want to get people in, get them trained up, get them thinking about career path.
It's up to us to build a culture and a platform with the right tools to keep them wanting to work at Amwins. And, part of that is the ownership. It's, they feel like it's their company too.
But let's say there's a scenario I find myself in, right? You're out with like the parents of the friends of your kids, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, Scott. And so what do you do? What do you say?"
That's a great, I just start with, what an important part of the global economy insurance is, and what nothing happens without insurance. capital. You can't move. You can't build a building. You can't hire employees without workers' comp. You can't do anything. And so, insurance is critical to the global economy. And then we're in a niche sector of that, and hard to place, tough areas of insurance for certain insureds, and we become highly specialized. And so we just focused on those specialized segments of the broader insurance industry.
But you got like 50 billion rolled through. I mean, that's like enormous, right? So I sometimes like settle on, I do insurance, right? Like it's like you could.
Usually nobody has a follow-up question once you say that. They're just, all right, on to the next.
We actually at some point printed this, it's pretty funny. It's a book cover, and the book cover is How to Sell Insurance on Airplanes. And so you could put that on your book on the airplane, which is pretty funny, and usually stunts any conversation
at all.
But Janice, my wife, actually read my book, and she was like, "Oh, yeah, that puts some pieces together, right?" And she thought that was interesting. But again, it's wholesale is certainly, some of the stuff we do is also kind of niche, but wholesale, you're kind of like. And so I think it has to be an interesting one because, I find myself in that. I sell insurance, and that's the end of the conversation. Right? Oh, that sounds horrifying, and yet, as we were talking about earlier, like with younger people, I'm always like, insurance. You're always surprised on the upside, right? Like you don't know what to expect, or you might be having diminished expectations on arrival.
Yep.
And then you're like, holy cow, like this is actually pretty cool. Like I get to meet interesting people. I'm doing interesting deals.
Yep. Learn about new industries. Buyers. Everybody's got a different risk.
When we always kind of compare, like with the younger kids, like banking, they want to go into banking. And I'm like, why are you going into banking? Like we're the ones paying the bankers to do the stuff that we're doing that's interesting. Like, why wouldn't you want to do that?
Yep.
You want to be the deal maker, not the guy doing the PowerPoint on the deal maker. And so people don't understand. They're like, I think you're making that up. And I'm like, I'm really not making it up. Like I have a whole thing trying to get like younger people excited about it. But okay, so now like 17, you're clearly in the rise of the golden era.
Yeah.
So what's the percentage of the P&C market that's in E&S in 2017 is probably
in the low teens.
Okay.
And then, that, accelerates over the next 7 years or so to today, where it's, close to, high 28, 29%. But if you then say, hey, listen, there's certain lines of business that can never be in the kind of non-admitted E&S, especially sector like surety, work comp, exclude some of those, it's more like, mid 30s, add in the, Lloyd's volume on top of that. For certain classes, you're approaching 45% of that line of business is in the specialty sector.
Which is wild, right?
It is wild.
So you think about that was never a concept in the old days. And so the interesting thing, from my perspective on that, when was the last time you heard of a company that was starting up and they were going to do 50 state admitted
branch offices everywhere, right?
Multi-line, retail, all lines.
Can't think of one.
Like
right?
100 years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe more than that, possibly, right? And so, when was the last time somebody was going to get into the sweet, E&S excess casualty market? What time is it?
I know.
It was a couple days ago. And so how do you think about that? Like, because I joke that, I could probably make 3 phone calls and turn on the spigot for, how many accounts do you think you guys see in a year?
We get over 2 million submissions a year.
That's a lot. An aside on that, do any of them not find a home?
We don't bind every one of them. That's for sure. I wish we did. But yes, every risk somehow gets placed. So,
which is pretty incredible, right? Like,
yeah.
And so you think about that. But that is, I think, in some ways, right, that you, the E&S industry in total, but you guys especially, like, have really transformed the business in your 25 years, right? Because most of these guys couldn't just say, I'm going to start up an E&S company and hire 2 guys and even think about seeing.
No, you're right. I mean, I think a couple of things, I think, that added to that I think, we were a catalyst for, and one is really specialization. When we first started, most wholesale brokers would work on any type of submission that came in, property, casualty, professional, didn't matter. If you got a submission from a retailer, you were going to try to place it.
Yeah, believe me, I know.
Right? And so, then you're not really adding any value to the underwriters you're dealing with. And so, when we said, hey, listen, in 2006, 7 or 8 kind of time frame, hey, listen, you really need to specialize. Now, there's time that you can, migrate your book, but you got to be a property broker, a casualty broker, a professional lines broker. That was a big change. And, certain people didn't like it and actually left, but then others found, oh my God, I'm growing way faster now that I'm specializing. And then you specialize into industry segments within property. So you're a real estate person, you're a public entity person, you're a healthcare person. And then you get even more value to both your retail clients and the underwriters you're dealing with, because your submissions are better. You understand the risk better. It works better. And so now we have this, industry of specialists. And so that's why I think part of why all this capital flooded in, because obviously carriers would love the freedom of rate and form, right? And then if you have distribution that is specialized, so you can target what you want to write by just going to a select number of producers.
When did you start down that path?
Specialization was in the 2008, 2009 kind of time.
Kind of early days, right?
Yeah.
But so you may remember this, you may not, right? I remember it distinctly, right? I came down to Charlotte to meet with you and Steve. And this would have been 14 or 15.
Okay.
And I had just taken over First Mercury.
Okay. Yep.
And so I came down and I was all full of, whatever. And I think I accused you and Steve, and I'll say it this way. I was like, I think you guys are disadvantaging me. I don't think that's the word I used. And Steve starts laughing and he was like, I think you guys are disadvantaging yourselves. And then we all started laughing. And then you explained kind of the modern purity of the wholesale market, which again, I had been out of it since 2000 at that point, right? I had gone to do specialty but admitted stuff, right? And so I'd been a little bit out of it. And so you guys had done all this in the meantime. And you guys then went on to explain kind of this whole, how you're laid out and how the whole thing works and how you do whatever you want. The choice is yours to do whatever you want. And I was like, oh, I'm going to take that back. And so I took that back. We restructured along those lines. And people were not happy. And exactly like you said, like people were like, I should be able to look at anything that comes in the door from anyone in any state and any line and any class.
Retail, wholesale didn't matter, right?
Nothing matters, right? But. And they're like, no. And then, so we specialized, and a lot of people said, okay, well, that's ridiculous. We're out of here. And then the biggest thing we did is we came up with this kind of triage model, which used the best of our machine learning brains at the time. And that was 12 years ago. And that's the thing still cranking away. But you guys, that meeting was kind of pivotal because we, after you guys made fun of me and sent me packing, like I was like,
I don't know if we made fun of you.
I feel like, it was funny, right? But it was a good, eye opener, and I really appreciate it. But even today, that kind of percolates through Crum, because I'm like, I think if they're structured like that,
we should mirror it.
We have to be structured like that. And whatever you guys are doing it was clearly not working out. And so they clearly had some issues that needed to be sorted out. But that was a funny meeting, and I distinctly remember that, which was pretty cool. But let's switch. A couple things I want to hit on with kind of the business. So you do maybe 10% that's delegated authority or something like that. Is that?
We so we have two, our underwriting division and Amwins Access, our small commercial personal lines. So in aggregate, it's about $6 billion of delegated premium where we're underwriting.
Okay, so a little more.
Yeah.
And so, was that a tough, right? The purity of the wholesale. How did you think about getting into that side? Or was it natural, or was it a big decision?
I'd say it was natural because when Steve and I got here, we had an operation that was bought out of Sedgwick when Marsh bought Sedgwick. That was a program operation, so that was on the ground. And then Steve's time at Crum, where you guys owned MGAs, right. And the London agency was at that time managing Seaboard. I think Blades you owned at the time was an MGA. So Steve grew up with the MGA environment and learned a lot on how not to run MGAs. Your part of your book where you talk about LW Beagler, and Steve tells a story about going there, doing internal audits in Sears Tower, and so
Arlene, who's still here as my CFO, she and Steve, I think, were in the same department for a while, and she tells the same story. It was like
crazy,
and
So from the day one, we thought MGAs and delegated would be one leg of the platform.
Oh, that's interesting. And then benefits is now probably
15% of the,
And that's kind of, right? A lot of P&C guys can't spell A&H, right? And so I remember when I went and spoke at your big meeting, and I looked out at that crowd, and I'm like, this is probably the future of this space, right? Because that market, which we've been in for a long time, definitely had that same mom and pop.
You're right.
The lifestyle agencies, right? And I was like, this would be analogous to where the MGA or the E&S market was in the early 2000s, right?
Yep. So if you look at our benefit division today, it's a microcosm of the broader Amwins. We have large account specialty brokerage, which is stop loss business, where they're doing that. We have our small business, fully insured GA business. And then we have MGUs that are underwriting specialty products, some stop loss and some other. So much like the larger Amwins, it's those three components that we've built.
That's pretty cool, right? So and then when did Stealth, was something you guys bought, or that was
we had bought three stop loss wholesalers back in kind of 2012 or 13, I think it was, that they put these three small ones together, they weren't a business, but they sold them together as a package. And so we made them a business. And so that we were kind of the second largest, and Stealth was their arch enemy, right? They were the dominant stop loss wholesaler. And that team would always complain about Stealth. Finally, then we had the opportunity to meet the Stealth team when they were thinking about doing something. And we were blown away at the quality of the individuals, what they had. And it was, we partnered quickly together and put it with our business, and by far.
Well, so how did that go when they came together? Like, I've had that happen before, where you get your arch rival and then they're together, and it usually works out. But
it worked out. I'd say, we told our team, and they quickly realized that Stealth was running the combined business. They were bigger, they were further down the path, they were really good. And then some of our brokers actually loved being part of the combined business. It gave them more tools, and they've grown tremendously. So
that's awesome.
It's worked out.
That is pretty cool. What about let's talk about culture for a second, right? We hit on it a little bit, but like, how would you, if somebody's walking in the door, how would you describe the Amwins culture?
Listen, it's hard to put a word on culture. I always say that, listen, you have to actually live it and feel it before you, because words don't do it justice. But we are collaborative. We're not competing with ourselves. We compete against people outside the firm. So we want others to win, which is different in this kind of sales industry and a lot of firms. One of the things I always say is, listen, we focus on people first so that you can focus on your clients, and financial results follow. And so a lot of companies lead with financial. We've never set a target that we're going to hit this much premium or this much in year, whatever. It's always, hey, we're going to build a great organization. We're going to build the best tools, whether it's, data and analytics that you can use to sell, whether it's, our benefit platform for you, being able to buy equity, all these things, we're going to focus on people first so that you can then focus on your clients.
So how do you get kids who have, what are you looking for when you're bringing kids in?
The interesting thing, because you're right. I mean, this is a business where, it is intense and hard work matters, but it's not one size fits all. When you look across our most successful brokers and underwriters, it's very different. I mean, do we have a lot of athletes that have been successful? Yes. But we have a lot of other folks that have very different personalities that, are more, introverted, you'd say, on the outside, but they are huge brokers and they develop a following. And so, inside retailers, you have the same thing. There's a wide variety of personalities and who you build trust with. And that's ultimately is building that relationship where there's mutual trust. And so I think if as long as you bring hard work and become specialized, then you can be successful in this industry.
But I also think one of my unpopular jobs in my broader family is explaining that like everybody is going to be like some kind of sales.
Yeah.
Right. And I always get this reaction, and it depends when I catch the people I'm talking to, but they're usually younger and and they're going to be doing, whatever it is. I'm like, yeah, but whatever that is, somebody needs to bang the cash register. Somebody needs to sell something. And they're like, oh, you're such an old cynical guy, whatever they say. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. But that doesn't mean I'm not right. Like everybody, I don't care what profession you're in, you end up.
You got to sell one way or another. Yep.
But I think getting kids on the front end that are on board for that, it's kind of interesting because once somebody says they're on board with that, I'm like, well, now do you really care what you're selling? And if you can show them an attractive path as to how it all works, they're like, oh, that actually, I need to consider that. Maybe you're not as as out there as you look, but I think finding that, right, because I think a lot of there's a stigma, I think, on that kind of
sales,
raw selling, but it is kind of fun and addictive, and you can see why it would increase intensity.
So the last thing on culture I'd say, talking about is, we're very flat, not hierarchical. We work for the sales teams, and we say it all the time. It's an inverted pyramid. It's servant leadership. Any of our brokers can text, call me any day, anytime if there's an issue. Anybody in, the corporate team, which we call group support team, we don't use the word corporate, is your responsibility is to support salespeople. And you better have an attitude that, you're working for them, they're not working for you. And if you're going to be successful here, inside, Amwins as a, functional leader or functional contributor, you work for the sales team.
That's interesting. Well, actually, corporate has one of those, like when we did the decentralization, which was one outcropping of kind of that specialization I talked about earlier. We had about 1,000 people in corporate, and we put them into the division. So it wasn't really a headcount thing. It was just
moving.
You need all the resources in your division to do what you need to do, which takes a lot of excuses and stuff off the table. But then each division kind of developed their own little corporate thing.
Yeah.
And so there's some sensitivity on that when I say, well, you're corporate guys, and they're like, I don't have corporate guys. Like, that's not the case. But I like group support. I might use that. Does your group support team then is relatively small, or?
It's obviously gotten bigger over the years. We've always said we need to run it at 5% of revenue or less. Was one of the early goals, and now at our size and scale, we're less than that.
That makes sense.
Scale helps.
What about the scale, though? I mean, is it easy to maintain the culture as you get that big?
That's one of the things that's probably the number one thing that's kept me up over the 8 or 9 years I've been CEO is as we've gotten so much bigger, how do we maintain that and make sure that the people we're bringing in the organization believe in how we treat each other and treat people, and it's hard.
And then what about hybrid work is the thing. You guys are kind of the ultimate kind of networkers, right? You're working the companies, you're working the retailers. Like, how are you training your people to network in this age where people maybe aren't out as much as they used to be, or they're not sitting in the office as we sit here in this giant empty office today?
Listen, one of the other things that we really don't do is, we try to influence behavior rather than dictate. And so it's been great. I love that. The one frustration is, post COVID, it's taken longer to get people back in the office, I think, but now we have great momentum. I don't think we ever changed our kind of official 3-day a week, but now it's, clearly 4.5. Certain geographies, Fridays, there's just, I don't know what you can do to get people in. You can't, right? But others, even Friday is at least half the folks are in the office. And, so every opportunity, every office I visit, I talk about you should be here 5 days a week. If you're not, you're missing out. You're short selling your opportunity in your career. The more time you're next to colleagues, the faster you're going to learn, the more things that are going to come up, the more opportunities that are going to be given to you. If you're in the office, people see you. And so I try to advocate for, being in every day. It doesn't work necessarily.
Well, that's a tough, and we kind of have gone, full hybrid, right? But I always tell my team, right, like in the old days in Chicago, right, Fridays were the day you wanted to be in, because about 6 o'clock somebody would come around, collect everybody that was there, and you'd all go out and meet other roving bands of young people, which was usually pretty funny. And a lot of the people that were in those groups were people that later are in kind of big roles all over the place, right? And so they it was just a whole thing. What about I'll hit on like the market today for a second, but I mean, you were at the nexus of all flow of insurance products at this point. I would say we're in a soft market. Would you agree with that statement? Like,
I would. I mean, it's not as deep as certain soft markets. I mean, I'd say property is certainly as soft as we've seen in past markets right now. Casualty, is getting worse, but still not terrible. We're still seeing net rate increases in the now kind of low single digit to mid single digit range, which is well down off the last 5 years of casualty. And professional has seemed to has bottomed out at least and isn't going much further, and we're even seeing a bit of positive momentum in certain niche segments of that. But at the end of the day, we've grown up in these cyclical in the cyclical business, and you got to adjust. And
I was hoping at least on casualty, I get it, right? People had to fill their property hole with something, right? But that one at least would have been a little less abrupt, right? But I was having this debate with somebody, is why I asked, because somebody was like, I don't think it's really, they were describing it as competitive as opposed to soft. And I'm like, I'm going to go with soft.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's a fair.
You can get stuff done. That is for sure today.
You can still get stuff done. But, and so what about, like, you look, here you are, you've changed the industry, right? You've had this wildly successful run. You've got to see all of it, which has to be pretty amazing. Would you do anything different?
That's it's hard to second guess. I mean, I think I would have earlier in my career, as the CFO, would have, done a better job of trying to, build more insurance relationships earlier. Probably after, 10 years in, I was so internally focused and M&A and making sure transactions worked once people were in, and didn't take advantage of all the opportunities to build retail and carrier relationships the first 10 years, and then luckily pivoted. But that's probably the one thing I would have done earlier in my career, is focused on carriers and retailers.
That's a good one, because I would say the same thing, right? I was Mr. Actuary guy. I felt the path to greatness was being a really good triangle guy, and then the light bulb went off, and I'm like, I feel like these other guys are having more fun. The CEO gig looks like a better deal, right? Yeah. But then so 2035, what does the world look like in insurance?
Well, I think we're still going to be here. I don't think AI replaces the intellectual capital that brokers and underwriters and retail brokers bring to the value of placing insurance. I think it'll be done slightly differently. I do think there's going to be massive efficiencies with AI, but I think it's going to free folks up to do more of the fun stuff, quite honestly. And I think it'd be interesting to hear your perspective. I think we're highly excited about leveraging our data platform over the next 5 years, because we've done over the last 20 years all the heavy lifting to be on a common platform, to control our data, so we're doing none of the work to corral it to then deploy some of these tools. And so we're optimistic that we're going to be able to give our brokers and underwriters, more information to make them better at their job quicker.
I think that's the biggest. Well, I have two. Like, my thing is on technology stuff is, right, you have, does it bang the cash register? I'm not feeling that yet.
No.
But if you look at, like, loss ratio, lift, right? I think on the underwriting side, can I be smarter? Can I pick, kind of this triage thing we came up with out of our meeting years ago has helped us a lot with that, right? Just keep us out of trouble.
Yep.
Prioritize the good stuff, don't waste a lot of time. And the other one's on claims, right? The ones that are really going to be bad, like, just, I want to see those fast.
Super fast, right?
Out of there.
Yep.
And I think there's a little bit of, like, creativity, or not a little bit, but a lot of creativity and data and proprietary thinking that can go into those layers. And then I think you have the efficiency, which, as you said, it'll happen, and we'll just grind that out. But the one that's interesting that I'm actually working on now is the kind of an enterprise risk management layer, right? So you just say, let's say you train your AI on everything you do over the course of a year.
Yep.
And then say, hey, look at today. What looks unusual? And that pops up on your screen. And you'd be like, oh, that'd be kind of cool, right? And so you'd say, what is that? Like,
what is that? Dig into things that might.
So if you put your auditor hat on, like, that would be pretty cool. And it goes from being kind of ad hoc or kind of, sampling, to just rolling through your whole data set. And you could prime that with whatever you think is interesting, and then let the AI do the work. And again, that's not replacing anyone's job. That's like making you a better
company.
Yeah. So I think things like that, where you just, how do I bring some creativity to, that's based on things that we've all lived through, right? But I was kind of hoping the AI would blunt the soft market, right? You got all this data, the math the algebra doesn't work. And then human nature takes over and AI goes out the window, or, whatever, the data science went out the window. And I'm like, and you probably have the same, I have a lot of interesting conversations around that these days. And I'm like, I don't think it works like that, but okay, well, we'll see,
We'll see.
But I think the market is interesting. What else? Any other advice for the future of insurance people out here? Like anything, tips for the next generation?
I mean, it is a relationship business, and so the better relationships you build sooner in your career and stay in touch with people, and never know where people end up. Like you said, your drinking buddies at 25 will be running businesses at 45 and 50 down the road, and so having those relationships is invaluable.
And think about that. Like a lot of my people have been here a long time and have worked with me, right? The people that have been with me for 20, some of them like 26 years, some I think longer than that. And meaning that and so when you think about those relationships, you're going to have a much different discussion with a person who you're planning on hanging out with for the next 40 years.
Yeah.
Than you are with the person who everybody knows that everybody's going to be gone in 3 years and you're just going to show up somewhere else. And I feel like that's something people should keep in mind. I also remind people like the culture thing. Like I talk about culture. We have a great culture of people working here, but a lot of the people who are hired young, it's all they've ever known, and so they're like,
we run into that exact same thing, right?
This guy's just talking because that's what his job is. And I'm like, well, that's true, but that doesn't mean I'm not right. And so then they'll go somewhere and it's like, oh my God, this sucks. Like, and that revelation usually comes a little too late. And I'm like, well, really, these things are important. You got to think about them. What else? Anything I forgot?
Well, hopefully we haven't bored people. This has been went on for a long time. It's been great. It's been a blast.
I don't think
from my perspective.
I think it'll be good. Like I think you have a book in here somewhere. And so, but yeah, no, that was awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. I really appreciate you inviting me up.
Yeah, cool.